Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. If you're watching this video and it's Salah time, please pause it and go pray and come back when you're done. Please check out the description section of this video to support the channel. So Candace Owens just appeared on Piers Morgan's show in person whilst in the UK, and I think she gave the most outspoken interview on the topic of Israel and Palestine Piers has hosted so far. Most people would not have the courage to address the level of corruption and the depraved war crimes the Israeli government and military have been involved in such detail as Candace goes into in her latest interview with Piers. Let's take a look at the first clip where Candace accuses the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of committing crimes against the Palestinian people that are on par with what Jewish people experienced in World War II.
Post October 7th, you had what I refer to them as like the Likud party media in America. I count the New York Post among them, who just insisted that unless you agreed with everything that Bibi Netanyahu was doing and towed a very specific line, they were going to smear and libel you and ruin your life. And, a lot of people, I think, shirked at that and kind of wanted to keep their head low. I don't view Jewish people to be some exception where you're allowed to now call everybody anti-Semites because you can't actually debate what Bibi Netanyahu is doing and why so many people around the world are not comfortable with it.
What is your view of Jewish people, of Judaism?
Yeah.
For the record, what's your view?
My view is that, Judaism is a faith. Israel is a state, and it is not above critique, and that what Bibi Netanyahu has done to the Palestinians since October 7th is a Holocaust. It is a Holocaust that is being committed on Palestinian children and women. And I'm not going to quiet my perspective on that, to kowtow to whatever the prevailing narrative is at the New York Post. The larger discussion that's happening right now is whether or not having survived a Holocaust gives you the permission to commit a Holocaust. And for whatever reason, people have been, what I would say, milking the Holocaust narrative and essentially saying, like, we lived through this and we survived this. And so now nobody can say that anything we do is wrong. And that's the big issue today, is that we have so many people that will not recognize that it is totally feasible that a Jewish person, and I'm speaking here about Bibi Netanyahu, could do something as horrific as what was done to the Jews throughout World War II or throughout history.
But is that an accurate comparison? I'll tell you why I say that. 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust. Another 6 million people were murdered by Hitler and the Nazis. The numbers of people being killed in Gaza are, in my view, have gone way beyond what is acceptable as a response to October the 7th. However, you're still talking about, at the moment, a death toll of under 50,000. There's no comparison in the amount of dead people compared to the Holocaust. So do you understand why?
But it is a Holocaust, what's happening.
Well, is it though?
Yes.
Well, I think language is really important.
I think language is really important as well, and that's
people
why
say Holocaust, genocide,
I think what's happening is a Holocaust. The burning bodies of the children that I'm seeing every day has transformed my opinion. Maybe the numbers wouldn't have gotten so high if people had spoken up when it was happening at the very beginning during World War II. And so I want to use my platform to say that I believe that they are intentionally executing a Holocaust.
Candace correctly called out the mainstream media for covering for Netanyahu over the last year and a half by weaponising the term anti-Semitic in order to silence his critics. I agree with Candace that Jewish people like Muslims, Christians, Hindus and Buddhists, etc. should not be exempt from criticism if they do something wrong. We're all equal and we should all be judged as such. I liked how Candace separated Judaism as a faith from Israel as a nation when Piers questioned her on her views on Jewish people, as Zionism and Judaism are not the same thing. Candace emphatically accused Netanyahu of committing, in her words, a Holocaust against Palestinians since October 7, 2023. She also claimed that the Israeli government is using the German Holocaust of Jewish people to justify committing another one against the Palestinians, and they have no right to do that. I've had Jewish rabbis on my show who have said the exact same thing. In fact, I think it's disrespectful to use the atrocities Jewish people suffered during World War II to justify inflicting the same pain on other people like Israel is currently doing. Piers Morgan, of course, contested Candace's claims, as he without fail automatically downplays the oppression of Palestinians, most likely at the behest of his Zionist boss Rupert Murdoch, who is one of Israel's main investors when it comes to land theft. Piers claimed that what is happening in Gaza can't be labelled a Holocaust, because when comparing 50,000 deceased Palestinians since October 7, 2023 to millions of deceased Jewish people in World War II, it's too much of a gulf. Since Piers wants to play numbers games, let's play. Morgan consistently speaks of October 7th, where around 1,000 Israeli people sadly lost their lives, as being worse in his books than 50,000 Palestinians being eliminated after October 7th to the present day. Is that because he values European life more than Arab life? He might not say it outright, but subconsciously it seems that way from the things he constantly repeats over and over again when speaking about Israel-Palestine. Candace brilliantly hit back and said despite the difference in numbers between Gaza and Germany, she still considers it to be a Holocaust due to how children are being burned alive. She also claimed that if people had spoken up about the tragedy the Jewish people suffered in Germany at the beginning of World War II, like they are doing about what is happening in Gaza, largely due to us having social media in this day and age, which allows us to see all the bloodshed, maybe the numbers would have been less. I'd also like to add that World War II lasted around 6 years, and if Israel demolishing Gaza went on for that long, the death toll would be in the millions, similar to World War II. Let's look at the next clip where Candace shockingly accuses Benjamin Netanyahu of staging October 7th whilst calling him genocidal.
Bibi Netanyahu, there's tons of evidence, and obviously the Western media is not reporting on this, but the corruption trials that are going on with Bibi Netanyahu pertaining to October 7th and him editing the transcripts and the prior knowledge that he knew is now becoming extremely pertinent. It is a question as to whether or not he allowed the attacks to take place, essentially to then be able to go in and to commit this Holocaust against the Palestinians. Now, based on everything that I've looked into and stuff that I had not seen before, because the Western media doesn't cover it, Bibi Netanyahu caught off camera speaking about how he had no intention of following the Abraham Accords and how he was going to get around it. He has, I believe, genocidal ambitions, and that's enough. We don't need to dispute, go backward or forward. Do I think Bibi Netanyahu has genocidal ambitions against the Palestinians? The answer is yes.
Do you think he's a war criminal?
Yes. I believe he's a war criminal, and I think that the issue is how much power he has, particularly in America. AIPAC spent $100 million in our elections, and what that means is that they're able to write fellowships, they're able to pay journalists, they're able to pay people to attack and take down people who speak against their initiatives, and they are, AIPAC, I would say, is very much pro-Likud party, pro-Bibi Netanyahu, and this is why you have seen people like me being attacked in the way that they have been attacked for what I believe is just a human stance on what's happening to the Palestinians. I don't care if you had flipped it, if it had not been Israelis, if it had been Christians doing this to Muslims, I would say the exact same thing based on the images that I've seen. But there is a ton of evidence that Bibi Netanyahu allowed October 7th to take place, including the things that we found out, because I now read Haaretz daily to
You don't actually think he knew it was going to happen?
Well, let's just talk about the facts. We don't have to speculate on that. What we do know is that they did intercept the hostage plan before it took place, right? The 250 hostages that came out in Haaretz media. We also know that Egypt gave them prior a warning that the attacks were going to take place. Egypt said that they were being ignored. That was a fact. I've been to Israel. Have you been to Israel? We know it's the size of New Jersey. We know that it takes 15 minutes to get from one end to the other. And we know that every 5 feet, there's a person in your face holding a gun. That attack went on for 2 hours without interruption. I find that hard to believe. And this gets to the, I guess you could say, the nucleus of the corruption trial against him, when now he's even arguing with the IDF minister who he fired, Yoav Gallant, am I saying his last name correctly? Where they're saying that some funny stuff happened on October 7th, and they are explicitly accusing him of feeding lies to the Western media. This is crucial. This could be the undoing of everything. If we find out that he had prior knowledge, and we do know for a fact that he said that he intentionally wanted to take over Palestinian territory. He asked the reporter to turn off the camera, and then he starts speaking about his plans for the Palestinians. This was years ago. I think Bibi Netanyahu is a monster, and I think the people that are still standing by him and supporting him, I wouldn't want to have that on my conscience.
Candace Owens called Benjamin Netanyahu a war criminal, a genocidal monster, and a land thief that wants to take over Palestine. I think that's as accurate as you can get. She correctly stated that he has too much power over America through the support of Israeli lobbyists, AIPAC, who run the US government and media, having bought the loyalty of politicians and news outlets. And she made it clear that she's standing up for Palestinians because it's the right thing to do, not because she has anything against Jewish people. I like how she said if Christians were doing to Muslims what Israel is doing to Palestinians, she would speak against it the same way. I've also said this many times previously. If Muslims were treating any other group the way Israel is treating Palestinians, I would speak up against it. Candace once again called out the Western media for not reporting on Netanyahu facing corruption charges linked to supposedly knowing about the October 7th attack before it happened and letting it happen regardless so he could conduct a genocide in Gaza. It's a known fact that prior to October 7th, Netanyahu funded Hamas to cause political dissidence in Palestine. Knowing that, and along with these new accusations being made by Israeli authorities against Netanyahu, could it be possible that Netanyahu instructed Hamas to carry out the October 7th attacks against his own people? I think this question needs to be asked, as it's clear he would do anything to stay in power. As you saw, Piers panicked and attempted to cast doubt on Candace's claim that October 7th was an inside job, because as we know, October 7th is Piers Morgan's go-to catchphrase to justify Israel's disproportionate lethal aggression, which Piers to this day denies is a genocide. Candace swatted this aside with facts, stating that Netanyahu ignored warnings that there were plans to take hostages, as well as a Egyptian intelligence forces giving Israel a heads up, all of which was reported by an Israeli media outlet. And as someone that has visited Israel in the past, Candace made it clear that due to how small Israel is and how people can travel end to end quickly, and due to how most of their citizens are armed, it is very suspicious that the October 7th attack lasted for 2 hours unopposed. Candace also exposed how Netanyahu is on video mocking previous peace agreements in the Middle East. I can confirm that I've seen this video myself on X just recently. Let's look at the next clip where Candace educates Piers on what the proportionate response for the IDF should have been after October 7th.
Let's turn to the Palestinians, who I think have been appallingly oppressed for many decades. I've made no secret of that. So my question would be, let's go back to October the 8th. What should have been Israel's response to that, given the scale of it?
Well, first and foremost, there had to be a response. And we know that the IDF is very capable of a surgical tactical response because they've done it over the years plenty of times in which they're able to take out terrorists. We just watched them execute a beeper attack.
Right.
So
which I think is a very relevant point, because if they could do that to 3,000 Hezbollah terrorists, why couldn't they be as precise with Hamas?
Because they don't want to be. They want to level it because they want to take it over. And I believe, and you can see this, by the way, in the videos of the settlers dancing. I mean, why do they have settlers already ready? That does not seem strange that this quickly you already have settlers that are going in and taking over the territory, and you're hanging, children's toys.
But what should Israel have done, though? What would have been?
They should have just taken out the Hamas terrorists.
But how do you do that when they're embedded amongst civilians?
Listen, I'm not an IDF minister, but what I can say is, going back to that beeper attack, it seems pretty precise. And there have been many examples of them doing that in the past. So I just don't buy the BS of we actually just have to take down entire towers and buildings. It doesn't even make sense. I mean, I'm not an engineering major, but if you're telling me that there's a tunnel under everywhere, you only have to hit a tunnel at a couple of points to render it completely useless. So the idea that they had to level the entire place plus go out into refugee camps doesn't make any sense. Like I said, I think their goal, and as they do, they have all these policies mowing the lawn, where they kill a certain amount of Palestinians every year. This is genocidal. The aims here are genocidal.
As you saw, Piers predictably went back to his forever focal point of October 7th when he asked Candace how she thinks Israel should have responded. And Candace knocked it out of the park when she said the IDF could have conducted strategic military operations like the pager attack in Lebanon and Gaza too. But instead, Israel deliberately chose to indiscriminately bomb homes, mosques, churches, schools, hospitals and businesses because their end goal is genocide. I'd like to add that with all the money and weapons from the West and the endless amount of soldiers because Israel forced the citizens to serve in the army by law, Israel could have easily went in as part of a ground campaign and raided tunnels and buildings instead of bombing unarmed civilians from afar, half of whom are children. And like Candace said, they didn't do this because they wanted to level Gaza and occupy it. I was shocked to hear her say that there are videos of Israeli settlers dancing for joy as Gaza is being destroyed, with some even already swooping in to occupy parts of it, which is just despicable. Piers Morgan on Q parroted the Israeli propaganda that Hamas were embedded in Gaza in tunnels in a weak attempt to justify Israel's endless hit and hope airstrikes. And Candace left him speechless when she said hitting a tunnel at a couple of points renders it useless, and that there is no excuse for levelling a whole city, as well as bombing refugee camps, unless you have the ulterior motive of genocide. Let's look at the next clip where Candace reveals how previously she too was brainwashed to believe Zionist propaganda until social media opened her eyes to the truth.
I was on the Zionist side. Let's not forget this. For years, I worked for Prager University. I worked for Daily Wire. And so I was much more sympathetic to, I would say, the Zionist cause throughout my entire career. Social media completely transformed my perspective on what's happening in Israel and Palestine. And I'm disgusted with myself for not being more awake to it.
But that's interesting, because can social media also, can it wrongly skew a narrative? In other words, can it reinforce one view, which is very quickly established? I mean, I was astonished how quickly the narrative after October the 7th became anti-Israel and very pro-Palestinians stroke Hamas in many cases. I found that quite terrifying that was the case, notwithstanding my own view about how Palestinians have been treated before that. But could it be, I mean, you're a very smart person, but you say that you were affected by social media. Social media was incredibly partisan behind the Palestinians almost immediately, to the extent where I would argue, looking back at the whole time, that I've argued persistently, well, what would be proportionate? I can't think of anything Israel could have done, given that Hamas were embedding themselves amongst civilians. I don't know how they could have attacked Hamas without being criticised, whatever they did?
They would have been criticized, but not to this degree. Everyone was expecting a response, and myself included. We're, like you said, and we agree on this, we're way past that. So that's not even a question anymore. There had to have been a response, and you are correct that no matter what, the response would have been criticized. But now there are questions about whether or not, like I said, they allowed this attack to happen, and I think this corruption trial will tell us much more. My instincts are telling me yes, but to go back to your question about whether or not social media can color you the wrong way, for the first time ever, we were just able to see what was happening in Palestine. Before, we just had to rely on legacy media who has to...
But did you believe all you were seeing? Because I'm still not sure all the stuff I see is right.
Well,
it's very
some
hard
of it,
to...
well, but I'm now getting my information because I ended up signing up for Haaretz in Israeli newspapers because they're protesting it. They're calling this an ethnic
I read
cleansing.
that stuff all the time, yeah.
If Israeli newspapers are calling this an ethnic cleansing, why do we not have people in the Western media that have the courage to call it the same? It's clearly not anti-Semitism. Why on earth would Haaretz media or a Haaretz Israeli newspaper be anti-Semitic and want to see the undoing of Jews? Again, this goes back to AIPAC and back to lobbying. But to answer your question, that piqued my curiosity, and I couldn't believe that essentially everything that I had these presets to believe about Jews, everything was existential. Again, that sort of Holocaust upbringing in my mind culturally, seeing so many Holocaust movies, I kind of had these factory settings where I instantly always wanted to see Jewish people as the victim. And it was very hard for me to kind of shed that and to...
But a lot of Jewish people were victims here too.
Correct. But what I'm saying is my factory...
So it's not wrong for them to play the victim if they're genuinely being victims.
If they're genuinely being victims, correct. But when I say my factory settings, what I mean is that the second a Jewish person got hysterical about anything, I just assumed they were telling the truth and were the victims. I'm just kind of going back and assessing my own character flaws. I got this wrong in my political career. What you should do is not have these factory settings and actually examine the facts, right? And so when I started to do that, what I started noticing was I wasn't even allowed to ask a question. So I'd see something and then I'd say, well, what is this? And then suddenly it was anti-Semitism. And that right there to me signals you're not telling me the truth because you shouldn't have to do that.
I think it takes a lot of courage to admit when you're wrong, and I respect Candace for being so open about how she was previously brainwashed by Zionist propaganda when she started her career as an American conservative commentator. It was very humble of Candace to say that she is ashamed of her former Zionist beliefs and that her previous perspective was shaped by the lies pushed in mainstream media propaganda. What's amazing is that social media posts showing the reality of Palestine broke that spell for Candace. That's why it's so important that we all keep posting. You may think it's not doing anything, but it has woken so many people up. People with similar sized platforms to Candace are now defending the people of Palestine because they connect to them on a human level. Piers Morgan desperately tried to muddy the waters about Candace's claim that social media exposed the truth to her when he said that immediately after October 7th, people became, and I quote, anti-Israel and pro-Palestine stroke Hamas, which Piers said terrified him. Firstly, this is utter garbage. On October 6th, 2023, Israel was killing Palestinians and there was outrage online. In fact, the whole year leading up to October 7, 2023, Israel was killing Palestinians and there was outrage online. We can go back 8 decades to before social media was ever invented if you want, Piers. Just quit with it started October 7th narrative and look at the big picture from then until now. And if, like Candace said, Netanyahu did stage October 7th, Piers will have indirectly aided a war criminal through his biased reporting. Secondly, the slimy tactic of correlating support for Palestine with support for Hamas is what bigots do to shame anyone who calls out Israel's war crimes. So nice try, Piers. And as far as being terrified goes, it's strange how Piers never finds people who are pro-Israel terrifying, nor does he ever label them as being pro-IDF. Piers made the false claim that no matter what Israel did in response to October 7th, the criticism would have been the same. I agree with Candace when she said that if the response was strategic, limiting the loss of civilian life through conducting raids and arrests, rather than bombing by the ton indiscriminately, there would have been much less outrage. I can't believe Piers Morgan had the audacity to ask Candace if she believes the graphic online video evidence showing the suffering of Palestinians. I've seen these videos, they are heartbreaking. Children laying lifeless, many with missing body parts, the grieving relatives, the destroyed infrastructure. For Piers to even imply this is fake is disgraceful. Once again, Candace was on point with her response to Piers by stating that the horrific tragedies she is seeing on social media are being confirmed by Israeli media outlets like Haaretz, who are also calling what Israel is doing in Palestine ethnic cleansing, something the legacy Western media refuse to do. Let's watch the last clip where Piers tries a last-ditch effort to save face for Israel by equating accusations of Islamophobia with accusations of anti-Semitism.
I see it the other way around, where you get being accused of being an Islamophobe if you dare to criticise anything on the Palestinian side, even if a lot of the stuff that's been going on is worthy of criticism.
I haven't seen that, and I say this as someone who was deeply critical of people that were Islamic throughout my entire career, because again, I jumped into politics, and there's a certain perspective that you're supposed to have in America about Zionism, and you're supposed to kind of marry yourself to it. And despite all of the things that I now kind of blush when I look back on, that I sort of had those factory settings, they never kind of just like routinely dismissed me. They just kind of were like, well, she's bought and paid for, never called me an Islamophobe, whatever it is. I just want to be fair. And I want to be fair. If something happened tomorrow and in an elite place in America and a bunch of Jews were killed and targeted, I want to stand on my platform and say what is happening to Jewish people is wrong. I'm not married to hating Jews, because I think what Bibi Netanyahu is doing is wrong. It has nothing to do with the Jewish people at large. This is a foreign state. He's allowed to be criticized in the same way that I criticize Biden, in the same way that you can criticize Trump. I'm criticizing Bibi Netanyahu, and I think the ICC got it correct in pursuing an arrest against him.
Piers seemed to be sweating bullets by the end of this segment, which was evident through how he made the ridiculous claim that anyone criticising Palestine is labelled an Islamophobe. Candace debunked Piers's claim by saying that even when she was previously a Zionist and had made anti-Muslim statements, which again she was gracious enough to admit she's embarrassed about, she was never labelled an Islamophobe. If you look at how accusations of anti-Semitism have affected Candace to the extent she has been banned from certain countries, demonetised on social media, and even fired from her job, Piers's attempt to give the label of Islamophobia the same weight as anti-Semitism was yet another failed attempt by him to try to level the playing field between Palestine and Israel in order to make it look like a fair fight. I don't think Candace Owens is anti-Semitic, and I think it took a lot of guts for her to say what she said in defence of the Palestinian people, while at the same time leaving Piers Morgan dumbfounded and discombobulated. Thank you for watching. Make sure to join my free Telegram group via the link in the description, where we as Muslims can speak freely and without censorship about issues like this. And remember to like, subscribe and become a channel member for access to exclusive content. Until next time, inshallah, Jazakallah khair.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allah.